I want to talk about the topic of big tech censorship, which is a difficult topic. I believe it is an incredibly important topic. We have been seeing in recent years and recent months and even recent weeks growing assertions of power from big tech to censor, to shadow ban, to silence views with which they disagree. Just within the last 2 weeks, we saw Google, at the behest of a foreign advocacy group, threaten to, quote, demonetize The Federalist, a conservative online journalistic outlet. The Federalist was told the reason they faced the threat of being demonetized was because of objectionable comments in their comments section. So nothing that actually anyone at the Federalist had written, but rather third-party users had put some, as far as I know, unidentified comments that Google found objectionable. That policy is not a policy Google applies uniformly. Indeed, a quick search can show dozens of progressive journalistic outlets that have comment sections, that have all sorts of nasty things being said, that are not facing the threat of demonetization. And indeed, one doesn't need to look as far as a third-party site. YouTube, which is wholly owned by Google, any one of us can go on to YouTube comments right now and read a host of profane and racist and otherwise offensive comments on YouTube's platform. Yet Google was not applying that standard to its own wholly owned and highly profitable subsidiary, but was instead applying it to the Federalist to force them to demonetize. Now, the Federalist ended up just pulling its comment section down because Google's power is such that challenging the Star Chamber is almost impossible. Yesterday, we saw Twitter decide to censor and block a tweet from the President of the United States that said that an autonomous zone, a lawless autonomous zone, will not be allowed to be created in Washington, D.C., and if anyone attempts to do so, law enforcement will stop them. Google deemed the President pledging to protect public safety and stop the creation of a lawless zone in our nation's capital. Twitter deemed that abusive and so put a content block on it. Something else that complicates this challenge is there's an utter lack of transparency. If one asks, and I have asked representatives from Google, from Facebook, from Twitter, from YouTube over and over and over again, how many posts are you blocking? How many posts are you throttling? Are you just reducing the number of people who see them? They won't answer them. There are zero data that exist about comparative blocking, in other words, bias. I've asked the questions, very simple questions. We have two major political parties. I've asked each of them the question, how many posts from Republican candidates for office have you blocked? How many posts from Democratic candidates from office have you blocked? We do know, for example, Twitter blocked my colleague, Senator Blackburn's launch video for Senate. So she's a sitting candidate, or sitting member of the House running for Senate, and Twitter deemed her launch video unacceptable and blocked it. They refuse to answer these questions. They then respond, well, there are no data showing our bias because the only source of the data is the black box of their internal files. No one else has that information but Google and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So much like the individual who kills his parents and then pleads mercy of the court because he's an orphan, the absence of data is their direct creation because they refuse to answer these questions.